Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, distinguished guests, esteemed faculty students, and members of the IIIU community. It is with great pleasure and pride that I welcome you to the University Indonesia Islam for this distinguished public lecture. His Excellency Ambassador at Large, Excellency Aldrik Gierveld, and also friends from the Netherlands embassies. We are deeply honored to have with us today His Excellency Aldrik Gierveld, Ambassador at Large of the Kingdom of the Netherlands and Ambassador to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC. Your Excellency, thank you for gracing us with your presence and for sharing your profound insights on a topic of immense global significance. I also extend a warm welcome to our esteemed guests, scholars, diplomats, and participants joining us both here and campus. Your presence understood the importance of this dialogue and shaping the future of international relations. Today's lecture, titled Navigating Turbulence Toward New Paradigm in Foreign Policy, could not be more timely in an era marked by rapid geopolitical shifts, economic uncertainty, and complex global challenges. The need for innovative and principled approaches to diplomacy has ever been greater. So we are pleased today that Ambassador Gierveld is a very experienced ambassador. He's traveled a lot to many different countries, especially to Muslim countries. He already served several years in Muslim countries. I heard that Ambassador also served in Yemen and Muslim countries, so he knows a lot of situation and also economic and political situation in some Muslim countries. So we are very happy to have him here, and I hope students can ask different questions and possible difficult questions to him. So that we can grasp and also learn from his experience and also has deep knowledge on foreign diplomacy. My dear students and also His Excellency, I would like also to inform you this year we are going to have an international conference on Green Islam. This is a program funded by the Netherlands, as Mark mentioned earlier to you, that the conference will be held in our university and inviting more than 30 international speakers to come to our university to discuss Green Islam in our campus. So we are very pleased to have this. And secondly, I also would like to inform also thanks to the Netherlands, also Ambassador, that for your generous support to bring students from Afghanistan to study to our university. There were 5 master students that already completed in our university, and we are very thankful that you extend the scholarship to them so they can continue their PhD in our university. I hope that in the future you will support us in other different fields. In our conversation, you mentioned that Netherlands is very excel in agricultural environment, agricultural industries, technologies, and we have a large number of land in our university, 140 hectares, and some of them still not used. So probably we can have a cooperation how to maximize our land in this university. But certainly I would like once again thank you, Ambassador, for your time, for this wonderful lecture, and I hope that we can learn from your knowledge, from your experience, from your deep experience in other fields, not only diplomacy, but also agriculture and politics and others. So we are prepared to learn from you, and I hope our student can ask more questions to him later on. So thank you and enjoy the lecture. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Professor, for your kind remarks. Continuing our agenda, please welcome our guest of honor, the Ambassador at Large for the Kingdom of the Netherlands, His Excellency Aldrik Gierveld. Your Excellency, the time is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Salam alaikum. Thank you very much, Professor Yamari, for your welcoming words, for the introductions that you gave, and for your presence here. I know you are studying hard, and making time available to listen to me is something that humbles me as well, because I know that I have to now deliver something and tell you something about, indeed, how to navigate the turbulence of this world and how to find new paradigms in foreign policy. Is my voice audible also in the back? You okay? Good. Thank you so much. I mean, I'm a diplomat since 1990. I studied, like you are studying now, in the 1980s. I came to the University of Amsterdam in 1982. And for me, it's also some sort of experience to be here as a lecturer, where I was lectured myself in the 1980s. I studied politics and law, and I did so because I wanted to become a journalist. I had this very strong idea during my years in high school that I wanted to explore how the world actually worked. And I wanted to add further transparency to the world and inform the public at large about what was happening. And therefore, I studied politics. And later on, I was advised by a professor, and he said, you know, if you really want to know how power works, you should also look into the history of certain aspects. And you should look into the economics of it. And perhaps you should also look into the legal field, because many of the things that are in power relations have a legal structure. So he encouraged me to do a second study as well, and I decided to do law. And in the meantime, I also had to do my military service. I was a conscript, became an officer at the Dutch Army staff. We had a conscription time of 1.5 years, so I had to do that as well. It was still in the years of the Cold War, before 1989. So I had to work at the Dutch Army staff in preparing international presentations. For example, when the Chief of Defense Staff from Indonesia visited the Netherlands, I had to write the texts in good English and also prepare the photos and the slides to present to the Chief of Defense Staff. So from that, gradually and slowly, my interest also grew for diplomacy. And although there was a lot of competition to get into the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I thought, well, let's give it a try and see whether it worked. And to my surprise, actually, they accepted me. And since 1990, when I just had finished also my law degree, I became a diplomat. I never left, actually. Many times I thought, well, I now should move over to the public company or to a private company, but I never did. What I did do, however, was working for the European Commission. I was seconded to the Secretariat General in Brussels, so I worked in the Berlaymont building in Brussels. I also worked for the Ministry of Environment and Climate, because as a sort of exchange, and later on I was Director General at the Ministry of Agriculture. Now you could ask yourself, what has a diplomat to do with agriculture? But from a Dutch perspective, agriculture is very important because we are a very big exporter of agricultural goods around the world. knowledge from the Netherlands, from, for example, Wageningen University, is being distributed to other knowledge institutes, companies in other parts of the world. And last but not least, we have a lot of companies that actually do business in this field, from animal husbandry to dairy companies. And so you find Dutch business everywhere. Moreover, agriculture is very much also steered through European policies. We have a common agricultural policy, and our farmers get subsidies, and I was responsible also for subsidy schemes and the common agricultural policy. So this is a bit of my background. I did postings, as the rector already mentioned, in Yemen. That was my first ambassador's posting in 2014, 2015. I experienced there the troubles of the country as well, when more or less a civil war broke out, when the Houthis came from the north and also came to Sanaa. At a certain moment, the situation became very unclear, and for security reasons, we had to evacuate our embassy at the time, which I found a great setback. I was ambassador later on in Vienna as well. I was permanent representative to the UN in Vienna, and worked in many different fields, also as deputy UN director at the ministry. I worked at European integration. I was also very happy to live in Rome and in Budapest, two other European capitals. So this is a bit of my background in my career. As you can see on the screen, when the embassy people asked me, what are you going to talk about? I said, well, let's talk about the current day and age, because it's very much on top of mind. It is about the enormous amount of trouble we're currently having in international affairs. And it's on the one hand, war and conflicts in Gaza, in Sudan, in Yemen, in many countries around the world, in Ukraine, of course. But we also live through very uncertain times in economic perspectives, and that has everything to do with the change of power in Washington. But it also has to do with the vision of the Chinese president, the way, of course, the superpowers also navigate their business. And in those days, it leads to a reflection of how can we stay on a stable course? How can we navigate indeed these storms? And what do we need for that? And one of the answers is, of course, that we need diplomacy. We need diplomacy in order to avoid other means of interaction, meaning more violent options or more poking of and bullying of international partners of each other. So there is no alternative than talk to each other and try to find civil ways to come together and find common solution. And what you need for that in these days is stability and reliability in your friendships with countries that also want the same goals, that want the same things. I could go on for a very long time about what is all at stake. But let me say that diplomacy is basically about three main elements. It is about security. It's the question about war or peace, how to keep your country safe, and that is indeed a core element of your diplomacy. There was a German general or diplomat his name was von Clausewitz. He said, war is interaction with your neighbors, but then with other means. You could also reverse it and say diplomacy is making sure that war doesn't come to the fore. So security is first element. Second, it's about interests. Diplomacy is about interests. First and foremost, I would say it's about economic interests. It's about trade and development. How can we achieve a better deal for our own economy by trading with others, by exchanging, because others are able to supply a good for a better price or for a better quality. But it's also about sustainability and making sure that indeed the resources you use are sustainable. It's also about welfare and the distribution of that economic interests in your country and between countries. So the second element of diplomacy is about interests. And lastly, let's not forget that. And that's why I'm also so happy to be here at this university. It is about values. Diplomacy is about values, especially human values. And it has to do, of course, with human rights. It has to do with the freedom of religion and belief. It has to do with non-discrimination. It has to do with these core principles of interaction between humans one-on-one, but also in a global context. And so if I sum up what diplomacy is, security, interests, and economic interests and values, these are also the main chunks of the UN Charter that was written in San Francisco in 1945, where the world came together after the disaster of the Second World War that has also hit this country tremendously, but also the Netherlands and Europe, of course, and try to find a basis where everybody agreed on to work together in a peaceful manner, because that's the main aim of the United Nations, and work on development of everybody, work on decolonization, which was very much still needed in those late 1940s and 1950s, but also work at the same time on values. And the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, I think it dates back from 1948. You are nodding, so you can you know it, indeed. And people say, you know, we have an international rules-based order. And if you talk about the very fundament of that order, it's the UN Charter. I can recommend to everybody to have this little blue book. It's a very small pocket-sized booklet that you can wear with you. And it's a very clear text of what is required for the international behavior of all countries in the world, of all nations in the world. And what you can expect as an international citizen also from your own government. Unfortunately, this system, this international rules-based order, is under threat. We are in stormy weather, and we have to navigate through these circumstances. First of all, you could say the UN Security Council doesn't function as it should. One of the things that I find stunning is that 3 of the main superpowers in the world are eyeing the territory of their neighbors. I'm not only talking about Russia invading Ukraine, I'm also talking about the United States saying to their northern neighbor, Canada, that they could very well be the 51st state of the United States. I think that's ridiculous. It's also the way they are now talking to Greenland and to the Danish kingdom, because this is what apparently the Americans also want. It's also that they want back the canal zone in Panama. So mind-boggling things that indeed the Russians did in Georgia, what the Russians also did in Ukraine, first with the Crimea and now in the war in the eastern part of Ukraine. But it's also China. let's not beat around the bush. Also, China has motives of territorial gain, be it, for example, in the South China Sea, the Spratly Islands. They are pushing their maritime borders to the extent possible. And they say that Taiwan cannot be independent because it's part of China. We agree that it's part of China, but it has an independent status. So it's mind-boggling that of the permanent members of the UN Security Council, they are all saying that they want territory of their neighbors. Something that, should not be in our mindset after the world of 1945. Secondly, and it's in the headlines every day, we see trade wars looming. We see economic prospects becoming gloomy. Also here in Indonesia, the economic trend lines and the indicators are not as positive as, let's say, they were 12 months ago. And it's not only here, but it's everywhere around the world. Because in economic uncertain times, people sit on their hands. They do not do anything. They are not making investments in companies. Governments are cutting back in their expenditure. And consumers are also contemplating whether or not to do, a big expenditure. So it's having a negative effect. And also here, the ASEAN region is affected by that. Next week, on the 26th of May, ASEAN leaders will come together in Kuala Lumpur to discuss the situation of where they are. And they will also discuss with the Gulf Cooperation Council and China where they are. I mean, economic development hampering is not only bad news for the economy as such, but it's also bad in terms of climate change, sustainability, because new green investments are also postponed, which is not good news. It's also not good news because we made a promise to one another, also in a UN context, to create and to achieve sustainable development goals by 2030. There are 17 sustainable development goals from, let's say, healthcare, education, climate, food security, poverty. In all these areas, you see that we are not on track to reach those goals for 2030. So we also, in economic terms, we are not doing what we're supposed to do. And lastly, the values that the UN stands for are not being lived up either. Every day, if you open newspapers or click on your tablets, you read about horrendous things happening to innocent people that have nothing to do with the conflict, but are suffering. I saw that with my own eyes when I saw Yemen going down the drain. I saw the enormous impact on the food security situation for very young babies. We see it in Sudan at the moment. We see it in East Congo. There are so many places in the world where indeed we are not on track. And it has multiple consequences, because if there is conflict, people are suffering in all sorts of ways. Not only their lives are directly threatened by bombs or bullets, but also by by being cut off. It is appalling what Israel is currently doing in Gaza. Cutting off food, cutting off medicine. The Netherlands makes a very strong plea, day in, day out, to make sure that the humanitarian assistance is going back to Gaza. We are appalled by the behavior of the Israeli government, and our minister made that very clear. On Sunday, 100,000 people held a demonstration in The Hague, and they marched towards the Peace Palace, which is the seat of the International Court of Justice, where South Africa has started a law case against Israel on genocide in the Palestinian areas. These are things that are happening every day. So when you talk about the values, the underlying values, and the truth behind it, humanity is at stake. Humanity is at stake. So diplomacy is there to restore these key elements: security, development, and also human values. How do we do that? How do we find the new paradigms? Our idea as Dutch, but also as Europeans, is that we have to stick together. 1945 was the start of the United Nations, but it was also a trigger for us Europeans. We were the most important countries to blame for the Second World War and also for the First World War, that we have to overcome our conflicts and wars by working together. And 75 years ago, the European integration started. And we are now 27 states. The Netherlands was a founding father of the European Union. So you have to integrate, because this concept of a nation state, especially smaller ones, is perhaps also, in view of all the enormous turbulence, under pressure as well. The ASEAN countries, already in the 1960s, they started off with 5 countries, decided to work closer together. Indonesia was one of them. And ever since you have enlarged your membership, you're now 10, and ASEAN will grow to 11 when Timor-Leste later this year will join as well. And I think that even countries like Sri Lanka or Bangladesh might consider to join one day in order to be part of a broader framework. So regional integration is very important. Wealthy countries like the Gulf states, although they have many conflicts among themselves, tend to work now more and more together as well in the Gulf Cooperation Council. The Arab League tries to bring all the Arab countries, also from North Africa and the Middle East, together. And of course, there is also the OIC. You mentioned it, Mr. Rector. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation. I was in Jeddah in February, and I spoke with the Secretary General of the OIC about indeed how we could foster further ties. And today, I am having a pen that they gave me. It's from the Permanent Observer Mission of the OIC to the United Nations. I'll just show you, and you can confirm that that is indeed. Yeah. So it's a pen of the OIC that I wear with me, and that I wrote down and scribbled down these notes. So friends have to stick together, but it's not only indeed integration as such in a certain area. For example, in Southern Africa, the SADC region, for example, they're working closer together. South Africa is being bullied now by the United States, so they are seeking new comfort also by working closer with their neighbors. But it's happening all over the world. And also, we are trying to find each other. The African Union and the European Union having top-level meetings that were postponed for a long time. We are having talks with the ASEAN countries, also on a very higher and with more political attention than we have had for a very long time. So in times of trouble, you seek each other's shelter. You seek each other's comfort by working together. And my main point and thesis today is that there is no alternative for diplomacy, because otherwise the guns will speak. Otherwise conflict will further escalate. Otherwise further economic harassment will take place. If it is just the sheer power of a country determining the outcomes, of where this world is going to, we would be in a very bad situation. And it would later on also escalate to further conflict. So diplomacy is so relevant also for the 21st century. Diplomacy also in terms of cybersecurity, new areas where we have to work together. When I was working in Vienna, the UNODC, the Organization of the United Nations to Fight Drugs and Crime, also worked on a new treaty to fight cybercrime. Because everybody is suffering from indeed all sorts of phishing emails to get your data or to get access to your bank account. And perhaps you are all smart people, but you know, your parents are a bit older and might be tempted to reply to a certain WhatsApp message. Don't do it, of course, but I mean, we have to stand together also internationally in order to find more effective answers to that. So diplomacy is not only about the traditional interactions between states, about, let's say, relationships on trade. It's also about new items like cybersecurity, about cybercrime. It is also about cultural exchanges, about how we can find better ways to really make sure that non-discrimination is a core element in our international relationships. It's about migration. It's about many new subjects that nobody thought about a long time ago. So we have to have an open mind also to new agendas, new things that require our attention. In the field of environment, in the field of climate, biodiversity, new treaties have popped up, and we now have to make sure that we live up what we promised. We have to make sure that what we promised in Paris in 2015 is indeed being fulfilled. If not, we will have to face the consequences. And if it's not us, it will be our children. Because this planet will survive, but mankind might disappear. This is what we have to do. I'm very interested to hear your observations and your comments, your questions. You can tease me a bit. You can poke me a bit. And see what sort of answers I have. Probably I do not have all the answers, but at least you will get my reaction to your questions and comments. So thank you once more for being here today. Great opportunity to talk to you. Thank you very much for the invitation, Rector, and your great staff. And let's see how we can get a good Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for the wonderful lecture. We'll move on directly to the Q&A session. So the floor is open to all students and as well as lecturers, everyone. Mr. Ambassador, would you like to collect the questions first and then answer, or like question then answer, question then answer?
Well, it depends a bit on how difficult the question is.
Okay.
Sometimes I can simply say, yes, I agree.
Yeah. All right.
But I always like to start from the back.
All right.
Because people in the back trying to get my attention, I mean, you should reward that. So right. if you move over there, then we'll do it like that.
Hello.
I'm listening.
Okay. Hello, welcome, Mr. Ambassador, to Indonesia. I'm from Pakistan. I'm PhD scholar in political science. I have one question for you, very specific. And 2023, you have a deal with Israel about 30 million defense deal, like giving them missiles, rockets for their safety. And March 2025, you ban those arm export to Israel. So do you think still, as this deal really cancel, you really ban the export of missiles and rockets to Israel, or you have cut your bilateral relationship with Israel due to the current situation in Gaza, the massacre they are doing to the innocent Palestinians in Gaza? Yes.
Thank you very much for that question. The Netherlands is not exporting guns, weapons, or whatever at the moment. No, we don't. The Netherlands is, however, part of a program that is responsible for maintenance of F-35 bombers that are American made. And some of the elements, onderdelen, parts, some of the parts of that plane were also produced in the Netherlands. And it caused law cases against our government that the oppositioning groupings have won. So the government had to explain that. But it's stopped now.
Okay. And one more question.
Yes, please.
Yes, as the Spain started boycotting Israel and every platform, especially the European Union, they are just representing the empathy with the innocent Gazans, Palestinian. Do you think Netherlands should join Spain in this good cause or not?
I did not completely understand the question. So
Okay.
What's the question about the European Union and what the Netherlands does?
Yes, it's about the Spain. Recently, Spain started lobbying in the European Union to boycott Israel and to ban export of every kind of weapons to Israel. And they're also trying to cut their diplomatic ties with Israel. So do you think Netherlands can take such a step to stop Israel from doing this genocide in Gaza?
I can assure you, sir, that the European Union and the Netherlands especially are absolutely appalled what Israel is currently doing. It is contrary to humanitarian law. It is contrary to all the aspects of international law in the wider sense, and we do not understand why they're doing it. They say that they want to free the hostages or defend Hamas, which in a way can be understood to some extent, but the way they're doing this is absolutely contrary to humanitarian law and international law. The European Union and the Netherlands have been very clear about it. Only last week, our minister has written to the High Representative of the European Union, Mrs. Callas, to say that our association agreement between the EU and Israel should now suspend it, and further investigations have to be needed, written down on what actually is the current situation in order to do anything further in the association. So we are suspending and we are absolutely pressing Israel to the extent possible to stop what they are doing. So this is what we do. Secondly, we see that the only way a peace can be achieved is through the two-state solution. And a two-state solution should be based on territory and on a proper and viable state for Palestine as well. This week in Rabat, the Netherlands and Morocco are organizing a high-level civil servant meeting in order to prepare the ground further for the initiative that France and Saudi Arabia took to get a viable recognition of the Palestine state. So we're working hard on that, and our hearts is with the Palestine people that are suffering so much.
Thank you so much.
All right.
2 rows down. Yes,
No.
there, the gentleman. Oh. And then over there.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for coming to our campus. I am Atharuddin from Pakistan, doing masters in political science. So my question is regarding foreign policy, but I would relate it to the Pakistan-India 3 days war. So after the successful use of Chinese weapons, a lot of analysts say that it would change the geopolitical order. So how do you see the foreign policies in the upcoming days? Like, a lot of countries are now opting to go towards China, like buying Chinese weapons. So indeed, it would strengthen Chinese position in other countries, especially they are doing this in South Asian countries like Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. So how do you see the foreign policies? Will there be any turbulence or not? Thank you.
And you're talking about the priority of countries of whom? Sorry, I did not understand that.
I talk about all the countries, like they were dependent on Western arms and all those things, but now they are tilting towards China. So especially after the Pakistan-India 3 days war. So how do you see the foreign policies, especially in regard to that?
I think that exporting weapons to countries that are in a conflict is indeed a very delicate matter. We are supporting Ukraine, for example, because we want this country to remain independent against its aggression of its neighbor. The Dutch export controls are very severe when it comes to weapons to conflict areas. But the reality is, of course, that also countries with big weapon industries are seeing great possibilities to export arms to various areas, indeed, because there is a huge demand for weapons. So more control on exports of weapons has been something that has been discussed for a long time in the European context, for example, in the OSCE in Vienna, but also in the UN context, in a broader context, in Geneva, and trying to bring down the number of weapons being traded is something that is important. At the same time, let's be realistic as well. We see that many countries are rearming. They are beefing up their defense expenditure because they feel threatened. This is what we Europeans are doing as well. In The Hague, in June, the NATO will come together at level of heads of states. Donald Trump will be there as well. And we will discuss new targets for defense spending in relation to our GDP because we feel threatened by the Russians. And so a new expenditure on weapons and defense systems is also going to the detriment of our ability to provide aid and assistance to third countries. So there is a very negative correlation between all these tensions in the world and, let's say, the level of development cooperation that we can sustain. Because, of course, if you spend more on this, there is less available for that. So these are my replies to your question. I hope that it's answering what you were after. Thank you. There's a gentleman over there, and then we come gradually to the front. Yeah.
Okay. My name is Hairul Ramadhani. I'm from Indonesia, a student of political science. So as you mentioned that the world is changing very fast. We can see Donald Trump wanted Canada, Russia wanted Ukraine, China wanted Taiwan, South China Sea, Israel wanted Gaza, and also there is a war in South Asia between India and Pakistan. Anyway, Indonesia wants nothing. So those countries, those big powerful countries, are being aggressive nowadays. So what do you think will happen towards less powerful country? Do they follow them to be more aggressive because of those countries are those who have power in terms of politics and economics? Or do we, or will we make coalitions not to be aggressive? And that's my first questions. And the other thing is that we know that today Asia is on the rise, right? China is the second highest GDP in the world, contributed to around 19% of the global GDP. India as well, and also Indonesia maybe less than 10% of the global GDP. And so in the rise of Asia, does the West feel threatened by this rise? Or do you think that this rise is just like another rise that we can grow together? And the third question, this is just my, what is it called? Questions that really comes to my mind. What do you think of Indonesia today as we actually were part of you? Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. These are excellent questions. Um, on the first question, to what extent, indeed, are all these conflicts also a trigger for new conflicts and being followed by others? You know, people have asked me. I was in Malaysia last week, and I was there at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they said to me, they said, "Did Europe overreact to the aggression of Russia towards Ukraine?" I said, "No, we didn't overreact. We haven't broken off diplomatic ties with Russia. We are still on." Although very low level, but we are still able to speak to one another. We still have embassies in Moscow, and the Russians have embassies in European capitals. But we try to trim down, to the extent possible, all the economic advantages that Russia might have, for example, by oil exports, because they are feeding with the income of that the war efforts in Ukraine. And why were we so severe in our reaction? Because we thought it is an absolutely clear case of one neighbor invading another neighbor. This is not good. And this notably comes from a P5 Security Council member, a permanent member of the Security Council. So we were so adamant and so very clear and outspoken in our reaction to the war in Ukraine, also because we think that it could have a sort of trigger element, and for other bullies around the world could be a sort of example. So that's why we reacted so fiercely. And also because we feel the threat from Russia, because we have a common border directly with Russia, for example, with Finland, with the Baltic states, and Poland as well. The second question, I admire Asia. I admire China for lifting so many people out of poverty, for having top quality products that the whole world wants to have. Electronic vehicles, for example, they are top. They are really conquering the markets. And your question is, does the West feel threatened by that? No, we don't. We see that this is only logical and that it could lead to further exchanges. Only if competition is based on unfair rules, or sometimes by stealing certain patents or so. I mean, then you are talking about rivalry that is not good. But simple competition is good for the economy, and we do not feel threatened. The only thing that is threatening is if a country becomes aggressive. And that is, of course, something that we absolutely do not like. We are very worried about Pakistan and India escalating, also over territory in Kashmir. We have called for moderation in the way they're dealing with it. Also, the relationship between India and China very often has already led to conflicts at the border. Very dangerous, because they're both nuclear powers. Let's face that. And then Indonesia. Also, this country deserves full respect. This is a country with a very clear vision of where it wants to be. And you have had a very good and stable period with the previous president, who also created this university. And President Prabowo also has a very clear idea about where he wants to lead this country. He also wants to do more about sharing food and healthcare for the youngest, for the babies and for the children, for the young mothers. He has a clear vision about what needs to be done. He's traveling the world. I met him by coincidence recently in Turkey. And I've also seen him in February here when he was speaking at the centenary anniversary of NU, Natladat Uluma. Yeah. So great admiration for your leaders, great admiration for your economy. I hope you can maintain at least 5% of growth in this economic uncertain times. You want to do even better, but then of course you have to reform as well. And reform is necessary also to unleash further potential. So that is a big theme also because Indonesia wants to become a member of the OECD, and OECD membership might help you further in liberalizing and further modernizing your economy. So great admiration, and the Netherlands really loves Indonesia. We have a great admiration for this beautiful country, and many tourists from the Netherlands come to visit Indonesia. And also many students from Indonesia come to the Netherlands to do their studies, among which some members of the board of this university. Sorry, this was a lengthy answer, but you had 3 questions, so that's why. Now, the gentleman with the red jacket here in front, or the microphone is already there. Okay. Sir, with the black shirt.
Hello, yeah, thank you so much. Myself, Mohsin Ali, and I'm MA Political Science student. So my question is...
Where are you from? Sorry, where are you from?
I'm from Pakistan.
Pakistan.
MA Political Science student.
Yeah.
So my question is, as we know that the climate change is a very serious issue in the world right now, and recently US has withdrawn the Paris Agreement as well. So how is the climate change shaping the diplomatic priorities for the Netherlands, and what do you think the climate diplomacy is the part of new paradigm or not?
It absolutely is. Last question, it is part of the new paradigm. I said already, in fields of biodiversity, climate, everything related to, let's say, the sustainability and the resilience of this planet is essential for diplomacy. And the Netherlands and the European Union are very strongly behind the Paris Agreement and are absolutely committed to make it and set the goals and fulfill the goals that we have taken up as an obligation. So in the COP, the Conference of Parties in Belém, in Brazil, in November, we are sending an important delegation led by ministers to talk about the outcomes and especially the financing of climate policies also for development countries. And that remains an essential part, because if we do not save the planet, mankind will be nowhere. So it's an essential part. And so our commitment also to spend on climate diplomacy is really there. Yeah. Thank you for that question. It's very important to highlight that. Okay, where's the mic? There, gentleman with the red jackets.
Okay, I am Usman Kaur from the Gambia, West Africa. MA student in political science. And first, before going to my questions, I would thank you for your insightful lectures. I feel like I am in my international organization class because it's very interesting, right? Now, to my questions, like the liberal scholars would say that cooperation is very crucial, but in reality, I think this is very fragile. Looking at the international institutions such as the UN, don't you think that they are more serving the great powers than the weaker state or other states? If that is the case, what alternatives can other states do to make sure that their interest is also put into light? Because if you look at the United Nations Security Council, they control the entirety of UN. And you look at the General Assembly, that is represented, that every country is represented by their president. It's just like an empty institution that is not being considered. And to my second question is about the issue of responsibility to protect and humanitarian intervention. So, don't you think that the issue of responsibility to protect and humanitarian intervention is being politicized by great powers? Because looking at the war in Gaza and other wars in Africa, these great powers, they pretend to protect individuals, but the issues that these individuals in these war zones are experiencing, the citizens, is skyrocketing. For example, the issue of the hunger in Gaza. The indigents of Gaza are suffering, and these great powers and United Nations claim to protect these individuals, but that is not done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very relevant and very good questions. Now, you indeed said the premises of liberal thinking about international affairs is that also smaller states will find protection through the system, and the system simply doesn't work. I mean, I agree with you. I agree. The UN Security Council is not delivering. It is not doing what it is supposed to do. May I put forward one example? There is a resolution of the UN Security Council, if I'm not mistaken, 2417. Look it up. It is from May 2018. It's a resolution that forbids the weaponization of food and using starvation against other people. This was a UN Security Council resolution. It was adopted in 2018, and the Netherlands at the time was member of the UN Security Council, and we were one of the main sponsors of that resolution. Look now what is happening in Gaza. It's exactly that what the Israelis are doing. It's in clear conflict what was promised there and what should be upheld. I do not agree with you on the point that the General Assembly is not an important body. It is a very important body, and sometimes it has real power as well. For example, based on an initiative among many states, but among which also Norway, for example, a court question was raised at the International Court of Justice in The Hague to also look into certain aspects of the Israeli behavior in Gaza. So resolutions of the General Assembly are indeed not enforceable, but they are, politically speaking, powerful. So it depends on the area you're talking about, but sometimes also what the General Assembly is doing is important, especially in view of the fact that the UN Security Council is not working properly. So my hunch is that the General Assembly in coming years will even become more important as a platform than the UN Security Council. And then responsibility to protect. I have worked as UN director at the time also on this concept. I remember very well that we tried to apply it also in the context of Myanmar 15 years ago. But we're doing nothing now in the context of the current crisis in Sudan, for example, and in many other conflicts. Again, here, the world was appalled by its failure in Srebrenica, in Rwanda, in the 1990s. And that's why responsibility to protect came up as a new concept, saying, of course, first of all, that the conflict should be solved by the parties involved. But ultimately, also, it gave the possibility for the UN to interfere also with military means if that was necessary for a humanitarian crisis. But we do not lift that up. So my answer, also coming back to the first element of your question, is if that is a reality, smaller states have to work closer together in regional settings in trying to integrate further also to have a stronger stance towards other big powers. That's the only answer I can give you. It's a sort of power realitics. It sounds not very idealistic, but that's the only way to solve the system as we are. Thank you very much for that question. Good questions. I haven't heard any ladies, and there are two ladies here with their mics, so let's bring them in.
Okay, thank you so much for the insightful talk. My name is Saima, and I'm from Nepal, a PhD student in political science. So, well, Your Excellency, my question is, if diplomacy is indeed the only alternative, how do we reconcile that with the fact that diplomacy today often serves as a veil for power projection, where even humanitarian principles are selectively applied and international law is respected only when convenient? As a small state observer from Nepal, how can we trust in diplomacy as a reliable mechanism for peace when values are increasingly subordinated to interest and might often makes right? My second question is, you emphasized values like freedom and human rights, but when diplomacy becomes a transactional tool for advancing national interest, how do we ensure that those values don't become mere slogans? Thank you very much.
Very good questions again. You're absolutely right that international law has a universal appeal, but is not always universally applied. And that it is very often a patchwork of international practice that brings things together or not. So that's why it's so very important that also smaller and poorer states in the world have the ability to bring very good teams of lawyers to international courts, for example, or to send in a very good team in an arbitration case that you might have with your neighbor to solve it. But if you are not able to bring the money together to give you the right amount of international expertise and know-how, how to deal in an arbitration case, you might end up losing that case. So it's unfair. It's unfair. But that's very often in normal law practice also the case. So it depends very much on the means that you have also to apply the law in the way it should. Sometimes it looks like the law is something that is without meaning because it doesn't have teeth, it can't bite. However, a ruling of a court makes international headlines. It does something about the public perception. And in the long run, it has an impact that is much greater than initially seems the case. I compare it sometimes with the strength and the power of water. Water feels very soft. But, you know, if the waves smash a dike year after year, all constructions crumble because of the force of water. It's a metaphor to say that international law, if it is persistently and consequently pursued, has an enormous power. And that's why we have to adhere to the international law, to international humanitarian law, to the laws and the agreements that we made on, for example, climate change, the agreements that we have on biodiversity, on trade laws. We have a WTO and UNCTAD in Geneva. Let's live up to what we agreed there. Let's not bully one another by saying, I'm now imposing 30% as a tariff on your goods. I mean, that's unfair. That's not the way we should deal with one another. And then you said, well, sometimes you have the values and then you have the interests, and they can collide. That's true. But you know, in order to uphold also your international image, you cannot be only selfish or, you know, take a loophole in international law in order to get an economic interest for you. For example, if Western countries would like to take away critical raw materials without a fair share of that deal, also for the country that has the critical raw materials in its soil, I mean, then they are, of course, doing something that is not wise and it's not fair. And in the end, it will backfire also to that country. So what the United States is currently doing with Ukraine on critical raw materials is something that, you know, has a nasty taste. Because you feel that the United States, you know, is trying to get something out of it and is simply putting pressure on Ukraine because they do not have an alternative. But sometimes that happens, and it's very sad to see, but that's the reality as well. I mean, diplomacy is not about niceties only, or by putting up a nice image. It's also by dealing with realities. That's what we have to do as well. I can't give you a better answer, but a more positive answer. I think the lady next to you had the
Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and respected ambassador. I'm Amina Uruj from Pakistan, and I'm here a student of master's in political science. As you mentioned, ambassador, and we also witnessed the uprooting of universal values that all countries have agreed to keep the foundations of our rule-based world order that we follow. And in that, so you propose that there's a pressing need for diplomacy to be the way we deal with the current crisis. But my question is, how can we expect from the state leaders who are very proactively choosing the hard talk, which is in the form of tariffs, war, control, and genocide, that they'll see solution in the soft talk that you propose, aka diplomacy?
I'm not only saying that we should do soft talk. I think when I take the example of the Netherlands and the European Union, when it comes to the trade war with the US, we will hit back as hard as necessary because our market is as important as the United States. It's a bigger market, actually. So it's not only being soft, it is also about, indeed, referring back to common principles that were agreed upon also by the United States, also by Russia and China and all the other superpowers in the world. It is not by giving in. My plea is stick to your points, be principled, and have faith also in a change of government that might occur in these bigger member states. For example, in the US, you think that the Republicans will be in power forever, but that could also change again. So be also optimistic. And if you know that you do something as a country that is right, stick to it. And work with the United Nations, work with international financial institutions. Be fair. It's all about, as the motto of this university, it's about truth and about humanity. We know what is true. We know we have to call a spade a spade. And of course, it is sometimes very tiring and very also, I mean, you feel worn out if you see things happening that you cannot reconcile with what you think is fair. But I would say, do not give up and stick to truth and humanity. Work with international organizations. Try to brace yourself and organize your own power better. I mean, one of the challenges for ASEAN, for example, is how can we organize ourselves better in order not to be bullied by the Americans? So if we have a common position like the EU has, we are 27 member states, but we are able to have one voice. I mean, if you would integrate as ASEAN countries more here, you could also have one voice. But that leads to a lot of integration. And the question is, politically speaking, are the ASEAN countries willing to integrate further or not? So these are the questions that countries can pose themselves as well. And this goes for Southeast Asia, it goes for Africa, it goes for many parts of the world, whereby joining forces and integrating further, because nation states are feeble, you can get a better international deal as well. Yes, of course.
Thank you very much, Excellency Ambassador Aldrik Gierveld. I really enjoy your lecture about diplomacy, that one of the core elements of diplomacy is security, which means that there is no war. Yeah, but as we witness today, we are really disappointed that the war of like Israeli over Palestinian, and then like currently India and Pakistan, and well, Ukraine and Soviet. So I would like to ask the role of the UN to end that war. Well, yesterday, actually, we were discussing about preparing for the international conference. And then our secretary, university secretary, told us that how could we discuss about peace, but in the other side of the world, war, there seems to be double standards. So we need to have peaceful or peace to keep peace, but on the other side there is war. So well, actually you have answered so much of my curiosities when you discuss about the occupation of the over Palestinians. So and you have answered much, but yeah, I would like to listen more to your opinion about the role of the UN, yeah, and especially your country, the Dutch government, and also America, because I think this large conflict can only be ended by the powerful body. Yeah, that's my question. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think we have the same diagnosis about what is wrong. The answer to the remedy isn't that easily to be found. That's, of course, what I have to say. When it comes to how are we viewing conflict here and another conflict there and another one there, sometimes you have the feeling that double standards are being applied. I agree. And sometimes the attitude of a superpower in this conflict is completely different than the attitude in another conflict. And it's very hard to reconcile in the view of a third country observing what that country is doing. Sometimes I have great admiration for China. Sometimes I loathe them for what they're doing, for example, towards fishermen from the Philippines. I mean, it's pure aggression. But sometimes they are a very good international partner. Sometimes they are sending their soldiers over the border to India, which is, not logical. So sometimes leadership is whimsical and not always very consistent. For us, for the Dutch, we have to be also consistent, and we fully recognize it. And our government, who was in the eyes of the Dutch public too pro-Israel, is now being corrected also by the public at large. I mentioned a demonstration of 100,000 people in The Hague moving and marching to the International Court in The Hague. These are examples of also why the public at large also can take an influence on the leadership of a country. So that's why we need democracy. That's why we need free media. And that's why we need transparency in our countries as well. Because if your country leadership is doing something wrong that you do not like, you could say, not in my name. Huh? This is not what we should represent. I think gradually and slowly we should wind up, because otherwise you are missing your lunch or your next lecture. And I shouldn't try to keep you here too long. But is there a final question? One very urgent question?
Yeah.
Okay, it's very hard to. You decide. You decide.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. My name is Adam. I'm from MA Islamic Studies. Actually, you mentioned about humanities, human rights, and everything. I'm going to refer back to the mission of this university to decolonize and decentering knowledge. Actually, the act of colonization has inherent destructive impact to the colonized subject. It not only destroys physical buildings, but extends to the culture, knowledge, habit, even part of our Indonesian law, still part of the Dutch law itself. When we talk about the responsibilities, how would the colonizing country reconcile that effect of destruction, especially in the term of foreign policy and diplomacy? Thank you very much.
You know, we are all living with the past, and personally, I feel ashamed what the Dutch did in certain areas of our existence. We were not only colonizing, but we were also slave traders. And we have explored and also used to our advantage the richness of certain countries in the world, whether it was in Ghana or here in Indonesia or in Suriname. We have done ugly things. We were not the only ones. I mean, slave trade happened here in Indonesia as well before the Dutch came, actually. There are many things that happened in many countries currently, that are saying a lot. These Western countries did it. But also a country like Brazil, for example, continued in the 19th century slave trading. I mean, it's incomprehensible, but it happened. The highest authorities in the Netherlands have publicly excused the Netherlands and have asked for forgiveness vis-à-vis South Africa, vis-à-vis all the countries where we were, by saying this was wrong, and what we should do is try to work and repair whatever we can. And the answer is international cooperation. Sometimes in clear also donations in development corporations with grants, because we want to revive our economic ties and see what better deals can we do for the benefit of the various countries. But we are also, for example, giving back cultural goods that are in our musea and that belong, for example, to Ghana or that belong to Indonesia. And we have given back artifacts, important religious artifacts sometimes as well, to these countries concerned. And we are willing to do that with all countries where they think a restitution is necessary. So politically, we try to really be honest with what has happened in the past. I mean, you can't change the past. It happened, unfortunately. But we will do our utmost to get a better future with also the countries where we were. And I can say this today, the relationship between Indonesia and the Netherlands is an excellent relationship. And we are, although a very small assistance also to this university. And I'm very happy that we can be that. And it is with that mindset that I'm also representing the Netherlands to the OIC. That it's with that mindset that I'm traveling the world to do outreach and to see what we can do to make a better future commonly. On that note, Mr. Anchorman, I would say I have to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. And thank you as well